Welcome back to Voice of Good Sport Phase 2. Today we have with us General Dampath Fernando. Hello General, welcome to Voice of Good Sport.
Thank you for giving this opportunity.
Before we kick off today's interview, can you tell us a bit about yourself, the General, as a sportsman?
Well, that's a very important question. In fact, cut a long story short, so I've been a sportsman from my childhood, and I've been actively involved in sports, and I played basketball. I represented Sri Lanka, I captained the Sri Lanka school team. Thereafter, I joined the army and I represented Sri Lanka Army and as well as Defence Services in both basketball and squash. And in 2006, actually before 2006, actually in 2004, I got an opportunity to follow a full-time course in New Zealand, Wellington, on sports management and exercise prescription. It's actually a postgraduate course. I went on my own, spending my own money actually, because I was so passionate about the sports. And I followed that course, and after returning home, actually the commander of the army then appointed me as a director of sports. So that's what the paradigm shift, that I got the exposure and opportunity to get into national sports, because then at the same time, the same year in 2006, the South Asian Games, Colombo, doing the preparations, and I got opportunity to meet then incumbent president of National Olympic Committee, Mr. Dampath Fernando. So once I introduced myself, actually he invited me to come and work as a volunteer, and thereafter I got opportunity to work for the National Olympic Committee as the technical director for South Asian Game Colombo. So that was the stepping stone as far as my sports career is concerned, that I got involved in National Olympic Committee in progressing my sports career. Then thereafter, actually I was appointed as the Secretary General, or not the Secretary General, actually Secretary General, General Secretary of the National Handball Federation. That was the year that actually we started this, introduced this new sports, handball, in Sri Lanka. Actually the president was Mr. Dampath Fernando, and actually I became the General Secretary of the national body. So in nutshell, that's my little bit of history on my sports career.
Yes, so as you mentioned, General, you at one time introduced the sport of handball to Sri Lanka. Speaking of handball, handball as a modern sport was originated from Germany and then was spread wide across the world. So could you tell us a bit about the history of the sport in Sri Lanka and the current status of it?
Actually, Sri Lanka by and large does not have a long history as far as this sports is concerned when you compare with other countries, especially the South Asian countries. There was a special reason why Mr. Dampath Fernando, then President of National Olympic Committee, took the initiative to introduce these sports to Sri Lanka. And because there's a kind of a story where these sports being manipulated and being used by a certain section of people in order to illegally migrate into another country, and which brought to a great extent discredit and disreputation to the National Olympic Committee and as well as Ministry of Sports. So as a result of it, Mr. Dampath Fernando was determined, and in fact having a popular person in the world sports arena, and especially he was a very close friend of the President of International Handball Federation, Dr. Mustafa. He himself influenced him to start the sports in Sri Lanka. So thereafter, he got hold of me, and he got hold of some sports veteran who had been working as volunteers for National Olympic Committee, and we got together and we strategized and we introduced this sport in Sri Lanka. Actually, at that time, there was no handball in Sri Lanka. No one has played handball. So that was the first, introduction for this game. So what we did was actually we, as a strategy, we decided to introduce this sport to defense services, because we know that in defense services they have the resources, they have the facility, and a lot of defense services always promote sports at national level. So we introduced to Army, Navy, Air Force, and also the Department of Prison, and we got down a coach from India, and we did the preliminary introduction of the sports to Sri Lanka. So that was the start actually, at the inception.
So after the inception and mainly being introduced to the defense services, how has the sport developed thus far? Has it been introduced in school level, and what has the development been so far?
We have introduced these sports somewhere way back in 2008, and within a short span of time, as the General Secretary of the Federation, I have been able to get the World Membership, IHF membership, as well as the Asian membership. So that was actually a remarkable achievement, because actually we introduced a very active program in Sri Lanka, and we had a very good team, and we have conducted few programs, introductory programs, not only in Colombo but outstation as well. And during this period, as I said before, we got down Indian coach. Then thereafter we have been able to get down few specialists with the assistance of the International Handball Federation, and we have conducted a few programs across the country. And at that time the game was gradually popularizing in the country, and people were talking about handball, and people were very keen to know what this sport is all about. And even among the services also, it became a very popular sport. But we have realized the fact that for us to go to the next level, and for us to compete in the international arena, we need to introduce this sport to schools as well. Without the support and without introducing these sports in schools, we know that we cannot create, or we cannot make national level handball players, because it's not more or less confined to services. So we have streamlined that, and we have started that, but apparently, to be very honest, it was not very successful, right? We have been able to introduce this sport to 36 schools initially, but due to lack of resources and various other issues, right, it came to a grinding halt, and there was a lull period for about 3 to 4 years. Then again in 2017, we have again appointed the new body, which I became the president of Handball Federation of Sri Lanka. Then it took a different turn, but there again the gap was that we could not introduce properly this sport to the schools, right? So still it remains a kind of a question, right? So now what we are trying to do is actually now we have a very proper concrete plan to introduce sport to schools level, because without schools, without introducing this sport to schools, without making them very active and take part in this sport, I don't think that we can take this sport to the next level. But having said that, with the involvement of 3 services, especially Army, Navy, Air Force, if I may talk about the last South Asian Games, right, I have been able to win a bronze medal in the last South Asian Games. That was a remarkable achievement, because when you take the 6 countries in South Asian Games, I would say we were the amateur as far as the handball is concerned, because other countries, they have been playing handball for over 20-30 years. We have a history of about 10 years, and even this 10 years we have not been consistent. But what I did was actually we used the initiative to to get 2 specialized coaches from Europe, and that created the paradigm shift. I got them down 6 months before the competition, and we gave them a very intensive focused training program, and that paved the results. And at the championship, we have been able to bag the bronze medal. That's one of the greatest achievements in the history of handball.
Yes, that's definitely a very remarkable achievement, given that the sport is considerably very young in Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
So, other than that, General, are there any other achievements or tournaments that you would like to mention that happened recently in the country and have been conducted recently?
Actually, recently we conducted tournament because actually there had been a lull as you know that because of this COVID situation, right? Basically, all the sports, by and large, right, have not been very active. They have been kind of inactive, right, because of the COVID situation. So has handball. So there was a lull period about 2 to 3 years, right? We have not been able to actively participate in this sport. But recently, we have conducted tournament, open handball tournament, with the help of the National Olympic Committee. Actually, that initiative was taken by the leadership of the National Olympic Committee. When I was struggling to organize and promote these sports, right? And we had certain limitations in terms of resources and financially also we had certain limitations. Of course, the National Olympic Committee came forward and they said that, okay, we will sponsor this, right? So under our umbrella, you organize this tournament, which I did, and which, of course, I said, I would say that it's a success story. And there had been about over 15 teams took part in that tournament, girls and boys both. And I think after a lapse of 2 to 3 years, I think this tournament had been very successful, and also it's an eye-opener. And I think it's a word of mouth, and we gave a little bit of media coverage also. And I honestly feel that with that introduction, after absence of a couple of years, I think that the message will go for all the handball enthusiastic in this country to come forward and take part in this tournament, take part in this sport. Yeah, and also I think that's what I want. Actually, my ultimate aim is to introduce, as I said before, introduce this sport to schools in across the country. Yeah.
Yes, sir. So finally, I would like to ask you, sir, especially in a sportsman's point of view, what do you think could be done to bring the sport in our country in par with the other countries which are high achieving in our region, and then in an international level? What do you think that could be done to the sport in our country, and where would you see the sport in our country in another few years?
Well, that's a very good question. I think for us to compete in other countries and for us to go into international stardom, for us to take part in international championships, especially Olympic championships, whether it be South Asian Games, Asian Games, Olympic or Commonwealth Games, and any other particular international championship related to any particular sport, I think we need to first and foremost put a very solid foundation, right? We need to have a long-term plans, right? So in terms of preparation of athletes, we need to have the resources, right? Without resources, you can't train athletes. You need to have the basic resources. We need to have a plan, proper plan, how we are going to identify the talented athletes. Once you identify their skills and talents, how you are going to train them, how you are going to take them to the next level. What are the other stakeholders involved in this, right? You need to have a proper strategic plan. It's not an easy thing to do, easier said than done, right? It's a step-by-step approach, and we need to look at not short-term but the long-term, right? But of course, we need to have a short-term, mid-term and long-term plan, right? If we are to achieve something in the international platform, it's very important.
Definitely, sir. I think with that we have reached towards the end of today's interview. General, would you like to mention anything to our viewers before any final words before we conclude today's program?
No, what I want to tell is actually thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to have this discussion. And as far as this particular sports is concerned, any person can take part in these sports without any age group, and it is a sport that can be played indoor, outdoor, even at the beach, right? And it is one of the most popular sports in the world today. It started in Europe, now it is spread across the world, right? Even it's a popular sport in Asian, South Asian, as well as even in African region, right? And there are so many countries actively take part in these sports. The sport is actually good for your well-being as well. So I invite the school children to take part in these sports actively. And we have a plan to go into schools and introduce sports and teach the fundamentals of these sports and provide the basic resources and the facilities for especially the school children to take part in these sports. If we do that, I'm sure that maybe about 4 or 5 years, we can reach at some level in these sports and we can achieve something better than what we have achieved in 2019 at South Asian Games. So I welcome all these sports enthusiastic people to look at these sports with a positive mindset and take part in these sports whatever the possible way. Thank you.
Definitely, Chandra. So with that message, we would be concluding our program for today. Chandra, thank you very much for joining us. It was a very insightful interview. Thank you to our viewers as well for joining us. We will be back with you with another interview. Thank you.